And I certainly am not like the face of recovery. I am a person in long-term recovery. And my presentation today is on advocacy, and I want to share with you how I got there. The one thing that I would never speak about was my gambling addiction. And here I am in front of a whole lot of strangers talking about recovery from, but it goes way beyond that. I advocate for social change in problem gambling, and I want to tell you a little bit of personal story, a little bit of backfill, and then talk with you all about what you're doing, get some ideas from you. What's going to happen as we're sharing today, I hope, is that you're going to say, oh, there's an opportunity. I never thought of combining this organization or that activity. This is a room full of resources, and advocacy is high-touch people, right? Actually, you'll be happy to know it doesn't take much money. It takes people who are interested, engaged, and passionate about spreading the word and doing the work. And so you guys are already doing the work. You have a new tool. So I would ask you, the little pieces of paper from the hotel, if something comes to your mind as I'm talking, just make a note. Or if you think, B, you should be looking at this opportunity. I've already met several people here today that were like, oh, we're doing things to get rid of the word stigma. And we're doing some videoing already and never thought about including gambling. So that's how that happens. So do that, and that's why, we call it the Ask It basket, but it could also be the Tell It basket. So things that you're doing, jot them down. If as I'm speaking you think, I want to share something with B, just give me your contact information. So here's our objectives. And it's really to recognize the benefit of recovery advocates and of advocates to recovery, because you don't have to be in recovery to be an advocate, right? To do outreach, that's right. So it's to recognize the benefits of recovery advocates. It's to explore ways to bridge the gap between the service providers, the recovery community, and to the community at large. To raise awareness of what already exists, because somebody said, I think Victor was talking about silos, and there's so much overlap, and if we all function in a silo, we're duplicating efforts and missing entire groups of our society. And then the Ask It basket to share your ideas. So I want to share with you just a little of my journey, because we're at the point where it's really about the why. They said we did the heart, we had some really engaging heart stuff, we had community stuff, we had social stuff. But in any movement, it's about the why of it. And that's human. That's the human story and the connection to the heart. So I'm going to share my why of it. I mentioned that I'm a person in long-term recovery, and that's another part of the language change. I am a CCAR certified peer recovery coach. And their language, are anybody familiar with it? Okay, so the language is, I'm a person in long-term recovery, and for me that means I haven't had to have a drink for 26 years, and I haven't had to place a bet for 20 years. Yay. That language matters, because I'm not identified as a disease. If I was a diabetic, I wouldn't say, hi, I'm B. Aikens, and I'm a diabetic for so many years. And my blood sugar is such and such, right? That's not the identifier. I am not my addiction or my disease. I am a person in long-term recovery, and it has a big effect on my life. I'm the reluctant advocate because for many years in recovery, I would never share my story. I had the blessings. You guys helped me. When I finally got clean from gambling, I went to a counselor, I went to intensive outpatient, I went to a mutual aid group, a 12-step program. Life got so much better. And my sister Lainey used to say, she called me Beatty. Beatty, it's a childhood name. Beatty, you should write a book. You got to write a book. I said, why would I write a book? I'm not even telling my boss, right? I'm not going to write a book. Very private. Life got better and better, and she said, you should write a book because life is so good, and it was so bad. And when I first came into recovery, I was we call it in recovery on the 20th question. But, you know, I had every indicator, any name you want to give me, level 6 is, you know, the 20th question is legal 2000. I was ready to call it a day 20 years ago. And so I certainly qualified, and then life got way, way better, and way, way better. And very quickly, as I actually got the recovery, you know, I wanted to change the world, and I started balancing my checkbook was like the first step, and then eventually I became a real estate broker, and then eventually, this is ironic, I became the chairman of the board of a trust company. So I was not going to tell them that I am a recovering compulsive gambler. See, that's why I was a reluctant advocate, and I wasn't going to write a book. So life was great, and my closest friends knew, and my sister knew. And my sister called me after I was in recovery quite a few years, and she told me that she too had a gambling problem. She was crying and dying, and I lived outside of Las Vegas in Boulder City, Nevada, and my sister lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And she said, "Oh, I've lost everything. I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed." Why be ashamed with me? Right? I get it. And I said, "I am so glad you told me, because you just opened up a life of possibilities that you keep wanting me to write a book about. So let's write your story." And so Lainey, this may seem ironic, but maybe not after all the conversation today, but Lainey moved out to Las Vegas, and she lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Is that counterintuitive to anybody to say, "I want," yeah, right? I need to get in recovery. And I said, "You've got to move out here." She wanted to. But it was mentioned earlier about meetings, and we have about 120 meetings a week in Clark County and Las Vegas, Nevada. So it's a great place to get recovery. The people that I really am concerned about are people like Marylanders, or you guys have a great system, but it's so new to you. And to Pennsylvania, where there's a tsunami of casinos coming. They don't have the same history, and so, you know, Lainey moved out to Nevada, and got into recovery. And eventually, after a year or so, she moved back to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And in May of 2008, I got a call that I'd better get there quick, because my sister was having a stroke, and if she survived this, it would be a miracle. I couldn't imagine. Lainey was 52 years old. And my Aunt Bee said, "You better get here quickly, because if she survives this, it'll be a miracle." And I found out, I did. I flew into Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and 11 o'clock at night, going down 2nd Street in Harrisburg to Pinnacle Health, and into the intensive care unit where my sister was in a coma. And stayed all night, and the next morning the doctors were on grand rounds, and they were pummeling me with questions. And they told me that my sister had something called serotonin syndrome. And I imagine a lot of people here know what that is, but it comes from an excess of antidepressant, or an interaction between St. John's wort and antidepressant. So they wanted me to bring in her pills. And they kept saying, "Is your sister, was she upset? Was she depressed? How's her life?" And I said, "No, she was happy. You know, she just lost her job, but she didn't like her job. She was going to get unemployment. No major family issues. She lived with Aunt Bee. As far as I knew, she was happy." I brought in her medicine that evening because the doctors wanted to see if there was a drug interaction. And I also, my Aunt Bee was looking for Lainey's wallet. And in her car, Aunt Bee and her friend found receipts from casinos. We heard this morning about self-exclusion and self-limiting. Lainey really wanted this. And she self-excluded in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And she was driving to West Virginia. We heard if you move the ATM, that is not the solution, right? It's a piece of it, but she wanted it. So when I found out she was gambling again, and I told the doctors, I now know more than I knew before. My sister's a compulsive gambler, and I just found out she's been gambling. And I said, so am I. I'm in recovery. I thought she was in recovery too. And Lainey was much closer than Lori is to me. said, my sister's a gambler and she's been gambling. And the doctor's 3 words changed my life forever. He asked me, did she win? And he asked, did she win? She was in a coma from an overdose related to her gambling. And he asked that because he did not know. I know it was a doctor on, long day, no hours. I'm certain that nobody could intentionally be that cold-hearted or that obtuse. It was as automatic as this. And she did not win. And on June 2nd, I released her from life support because it turned out that she had indeed had a major brainstem stroke and she would not survive. And I released my sister on June 2nd, 2008. And my sister clearly died from a disease that you can't see. It doesn't show up in slurred speech. It doesn't show up, we don't pass out. We just keep going, functioning, and are filled with shame and pain. And a disease that we call the invisible disease took my sister's life and broke a piece of my heart. But that is how life works. That's how the why works. Because, great adversity, challenges, adversity is not unique to me. Every person in this room has faced challenges, and you may be in them now. And so, our story may be unique that we're siblings with the same addiction and a different outcome. But it's what you do with it. And I kind of thought that someday I might have to talk about this. Wasn't going to write the book, still. But I would have to talk about it. And in very short order, I was still doing the real estate thing and the trust company thing, and that was in June of '08. And in January of '09, I was on the board of the National Association of Women Business Owners, and then we had an emergency meeting, and we're told, B, you've got to get here, we're having an emergency meeting. I walk into the meeting, and our immediate past president is sitting there with her head down, and it's silent. I was like, it was raining in Las Vegas, which makes the whole world stop, right? So it was raining, I was 5 minutes late for the meeting, and obviously something big was going on, and this woman had her head down, and everybody around her was quiet. Any idea what might have happened? She was a compulsive gambler, and she'd embezzled all of our treasury. Yeah. And that was the moment that I said, well, ladies, there's no accident that I'm on this board. I'm a compulsive gambler. I understand and I can help. And immediately after that, my head said, oh, was that my outside voice? Dang it. I think that was out loud. Nobody went running from the room. And, it wasn't that scary. And these women were so compassionate and said, what can be done, what can be done? And knowing both sides of the fence, I knew that we had a fiduciary responsibility to our stakeholders. You don't brush it under the rug and you reimburse the Treasury. This needs to be public knowledge. And I also invited that woman to a meeting. And I realized, my gosh, B, you're kind of uniquely positioned to straddle both worlds. And at this point in life, if people run out of the room, do I care? It's not why God put me here. So here I am, the reluctant advocate. And shortly after that incident, I went to, the first time I ever went to a state conference on problem gambling, and it was in Nevada. I'm sure many of you know my mentor, Carol O'Hare, and she's an amazing woman. And I went to her conference, and I saw friends and people I knew from recovery that were presenting there. And Keith White was there, and Keith White said, for those of you that don't know, he's the executive director of the National Council on Problem Gambling. God kept pecking at me to tell my story out loud, and I kept saying, okay, when I retire. And God loves it when I negotiate with him. And Keith said the problem with gamblers in recovery is they're so anonymous, they're invisible. And I'm sitting where Michael is and going, yeah. So I knew that it was my time. And I went up to Carol and Keith after that conference, and how naive am I? I mean, I was successful in business, but I was not in your world at the time. And I said to Keith, I think I can help with this invisible thing. He didn't know who I was. And he looked at Carol O'Hare to make sure I wasn't like a crazy stalker. And she said, no, she's okay. So it just kind of evolved from there. And ultimately, I realized that this is the work I was meant to do. And I didn't know how, I have a lot of business acumen, and I didn't have a business plan. I had passion, which is a really great start for this, but you don't want to go too far out there till you know what you're doing. So I spent a lot of time learning from people like Victor and Carol, and I've been to conferences all over the world in a whole different arena, learning your language, which is very different than the recovery language. And again, I think that's God's way of preparing me to straddle those worlds. So here I am, your reluctant advocate. And why do we need them? First of all, we need advocates because it's about stories, right? As important as the numbers are, like there's a wow factor to what Victor told us about $100 billion in revenue from gambling, and $400 billion in underground or underreported. I mean, those kind of numbers mean something, like, whoa. And then especially when you put it next to the numbers that are given to councils, and as amazing as the Center of Excellence is, it doesn't compare. But stories make the difference, right? It's about a face. It's about a heart. It's about a lot of faces and a lot of hearts and people that are impacted. So when we advocate, it gives us success stories. It expands the workforce, and most councils are tiny, like little engine that could, or amazing, like you think that there's this giant organization and there's 3 people, right? And they do amazing work. I mean, amazing work. So it expands their workforce. It's an untapped resource for community involvement. Here's my biggest thing, is to destigmatize addiction and to destigmatize recovery, right? I spent enough years in shame in my addiction. Isn't that weird that I would be so secretive about the greatest healing of ever? I don't say I'm healed, but I say I'm in recovery. And why be ashamed of that? So to take the recovery and to take the addiction out of the shadows and to destigmatize. And then big goal is to change public opinion and policy. Recovering individuals become recovery champions. And champions create a movement. So are you all ready to be a part of a movement? Yeah? Anybody ready to be part of a movement? Me too, and I have a feeling there's one afoot. So from the invisible addiction to invisible recovery community to champions of recovery. I have to tell you that it is an invisible addiction because you can't tell. We often say that if you give a drug addict $10,000, they'll probably not be back in a minute, and they will pass out from their drug of choice, and then seek more. If you give a gambler $10,000, they'll be back. It depends on who you ask, in an hour, right? There's no satiety. So it's invisible. But I want to tell you guys another invisible story that really launched hey, I think I'm on the right track here because of the response. I get in a lot of trouble inadvertently. I like to test the envelope a little bit. And I went to a recovery event in Tampa. I got in so much trouble. But it's okay, because it's just okay. I'll tell you why. I told my peers in recovery, we were filming only me, because we're so invisible. And clearly going in, everybody knew, okay, Bee's filming this, but it's only her. Are you good with that? Yeah, we're good with that. And the room was packed. And I told them about Keith White saying, we're so invisible, we're so anonymous, we're invisible. Do you know that people out there don't know we're dying? They don't know we're suffering. There's no face to it. And they got inspired, and they were passionate, and this is what I said at the conclusion. I said, I'm not asking you to break your anonymity. I'm not asking you to be filmed. I'm not asking you anything other than to say, if you think your voice matters, if you think your story matters, your life matters, and your recovery is something to celebrate, I ask you to stand with me and simply say, I am not invisible. And the room was quiet, just like this. And so I said, I'll start. I am not invisible. Someone over there, I am not invisible. I am not invisible. I'm not invisible. And the whole room said, I am not invisible, because people matter. And it was so beautiful. And I was touched, and you can tell, like, real moment. And I loved it, and I put it up on Facebook, and I said, we're not invisible. And within 48 hours, I got a call. And they said, B, that invisible thing, you got to take it down. I said, why would I take it down? I'm the only one, I'm allowed to say that I'm in recovery, right? I'm not breaking any secret code. Well, you can recognize people's voices. I said, really? Whoa, how are you guys ever going to know that there's a problem? How is the world ever going to know we're out there? I can't even let you hear my voice. So I told the chairman of the board that asked me to take it down, I told him I'd pray about it. So check it out, it's on Facebook. Sometimes you just got to go with, right, the higher authority on this, and I did pray about it. So we are not invisible. And now we're learning to be champions of recovery. And it's taken time, but we're making progress. I want to share some of that with you. Has anybody read this book? Let's Go Make Some History? Well, I hope they have it in the bookstore, but you got to get it. It's amazing. William White is a champion of the recovery movement, and he is in the movie The Anonymous People. And this is an incredible resource. Let's go make some history. And here's what William White says. It's time for a vanguard of recovering people to stand up and announce their presence in this culture. Not as members of any identified recovery fellowship, but as members of a larger recovery community. This invitation explicitly includes family members in recovery. We talked about that. The family members in recovery, so often left behind in this, and especially with gambling, because we're very messy. We leave a lot of fallout for our family. Even those of us who have lost loved ones to addiction must become more than saddened spectators of such loss. We must find a way to tell our lost person's story wrapped within our own story. Love that. Words matter. I told you about the CCAR in Connecticut, and they do training on peer recovery coaching, peer-to-peer coaching, and the language to use, and the words matter, and identifying ourselves by our recovery at the very, if I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to talk about recovery, not, oh, I'm a compulsive gambler. I'm a disordered gambler. So words do matter, and in Nevada we started this program called Press On. Does every field have as many acronyms as this one? Yeah, TIP and Press On. So we had our first meeting last year to get some peers involved, some of the other people in recovery, and guess what they said? I don't want to be a peer, because then everybody's going to know I'm in recovery. I don't even want you recording my voice, B. Why am I going to be your peer in recovery? So this is how we learn and grow, so now it's promoting recovery. But words matter. The recovery community, they do not want to be identified, right? So we now promote recovery, so anybody can join. So what mutual aid group members tell us, anonymity is important to them, and I am not. When I share that story about I am not invisible, it's a little shocking to me, but I truly don't mean to dishonor the recovery community and the importance of anonymity. There are very valid reasons for it, but I just feel that we've taken it too far where the world doesn't know we're there. So they don't want to be identified by peers. They will support group activities that do not call them out as, oh, this is the gambling recovery community. They'll do group activities. They felt shame in their addiction, and they no longer want to feel shame in recovery. And recovering compulsive gamblers experience prejudice, even within recovery groups. Is that hard to believe? Has anybody experienced that? Yeah. I told you I'm a double achiever, right? The alcohol and the gambling. I have been in groups with recovery from alcohol that have said, I don't understand, and if I lose $20, I'm just sick. I go home. Why don't you just stop? Okay. It's shocking that people in recovery from other addictions, they can't even get it. And I understand that because we're not ingesting anything. So just stop. If I would have thought of that 20 or 30 years ago, more than 20. I did it 20 years ago, but 30 years ago, life would have been a lot different. So compulsive gamblers experience that. We also experience this treatment. I heard a lot about treatment earlier. In treatment, I've been across the country and around the country. Here's what I learned in a meeting in Kentucky. For gosh sakes, you don't know how to get treatment? You get treatment by dousing yourself in alcohol. You got to smell like bourbon and drink a lot of vodka, and then your blood alcohol level go up, and they'll take you. That's just not right. Yeah, I have to pretend to be some other kind of addict so I can get the treatment I need. And also, suicide prevention. I personally took a woman to the hospital once for suicidal ideation, and they said, do you have a drug problem? No, it's gambling. Do you have an alcohol problem? No, gambling. Oh, sweetie, that's too bad because your insurance won't cover it. That's crazy. That is not okay. That's what all of you work for, right? Do the outreach and make the movement. And Victor told us it's a public health issue. It's a public health issue. Shouldn't be ashamed, shouldn't be denied treatment. Movements involve more than the afflicted, they involve the community. So that means that, here's the vision. We have a recovery rally. Had a pretty amazing one last year, didn't we? Pretty amazing in Washington. But everybody that walks in those things is not necessarily, right? Everybody that walks in Susan G. Komen doesn't have breast cancer, didn't survive breast cancer, right? Some do. But participating in that does not say, oh, cancer, she has cancer, she had cancer. We need that same kind of group community engagement with the recovery community. And this, we need to find our shoes on kids story. And this is where the Ask It basket comes in. If you have a shoes on kids story. Somebody once said, B, you're not exactly asking me to adopt a puppy, right? There's nothing warm and fuzzy and soft about a compulsive gambler. Yeah, but our hearts are breaking, and we have the highest suicide rate of any group, and we desperately need help. So we need the story that touches the heart. And more I find people who say, B, I'll share my story. I'll share my story. How are people ever going to know there's a human heart and a family impacted by this disease if they don't? But we need to find the stories that touch the heart. It may start with just one recovering compulsive gambler sharing their story, their family telling their community, their friends telling their story, and a community sharing the story. So if you found a story, share it. And I would ask you to share it on Laney's Hope website. There's a place to share your story. There's also, shameless plug, a story. Life Choices, Passion. This is in the bookstore, and Laney's story is in there. So are a lot of other awesome stories. And I'm moving from Pennsylvania. My husband lives in Pennsylvania. I live in Nevada. Long story. And we're going to live in the same state starting now. So I brought all of those books that I had in Pennsylvania. I don't want to take them home with me. So I put them in the bookstore and said, give them to anybody that will make any contribution to Laney's Hope. So there's no qualifier. It could be $1, okay? It's also where you get the recovery buttons, Laney's Hope. So please go see them in the bookstore. But that is, you know, sharing stories, sharing passion, sharing community is what we're about. And advocacy doesn't need to be grand to provide active support, to make a difference. And actually, there's a big difference between advocacy and service work. I do both, right? Part of the service work, I took a picture of those little credit cards because people will give me money and say, you know, before we were a nonprofit, we were a no-profit. And it was the little engine that could Facebook page and said, I want to help. Well, there's some real life needs for people in early recovery that can keep them from getting recovery. Like if you're hungry, if you're starving, if your kids aren't fed, if you can't pay for your bus ticket to get to a meeting, those are real world things. So these little cards, people donate them, and we have a little sunshine fund that is you know, given to people that are earnestly trying to get recovery and need it. So now that we're nonprofit, you know, that's a going forward initiative to find a way to implement that, because you know, if you're feeding people, giving them transportation, taking care of their kids, and enhancing recovery, that might be a shoes on kids kind of story. So we do that. We provide, there's a picture of me buying groceries because you never give a compulsive gambler money. Everybody knows that, right? Say it again. Never give a compulsive gambler, okay, but you can help them. Give them a leg up. Give them a food card, a gas card, a bus pass. So it can be as little as that. And for those of you that know this terrible picture, poor Rick Benson, but he's, you know, helping me move chairs for somebody that got new housing. So it can be, you know, as little as moving furniture for someone. It can be active support, and these are friends and peers, and they're not all in recovery, but they come to support. And, you know, it's kind of one of those takes a village community thing to take away the stigma. Here's where the movement starts. So Laney's Hope has been around for a while. People are starting to associate Laney's Hope with something to do with gambling addiction, something to do with recovery, and suicide. Here's the sad fact. Laney's Hope's mission is to humanize and illuminate the disease of compulsive gambling. Nowhere in our mission statement do we mention suicide. We get more organic hits on suicide than any other topic. This morning, last night, I had 4 new blog posts to approve. 3 of them were on suicide. A family member lost. I'm considering it. So clearly suicide has become part of the mission, suicide prevention. And I said, well, okay, we'll walk in the suicide prevention walk. And this was our little first group, the first year that we walked in the suicide prevention, and had our little Laney's Hope shirts. And it's ignited a movement. And that circle, if you've ever been to a suicide prevention, that circle is the circle of family members who have lost their family member to suicide. And this is how it works. You know, there's times when, you know, it happens, like you get in and out of your heart. Did anybody ever experience that? Like this is what happened to me at the suicide walk the first time. It's like, oh, I'm doing a community service. Laney's Hope is here. My friends are here. We're going to walk for suicide prevention. It sounds cold, but it's just like, oh, we're doing a community service event. And all of a sudden, they start this circle. Anybody that's lost anybody in the last 6 months, anybody that lost a child to suicide, come in the circle. Anyone that's lost a parent, please come join us in the circle. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I don't want to be in the circle. I don't want to be in the circle. And it hit me like, oh, I don't want to be in this circle. That's the why of it, though. I don't want other people to be in that circle. That's what you do. Keep people not from being in the circle. of family members or the ones that have lost loved ones to suicide. These folks are doing some amazing work. Well, let me back up to suicide and tell you this. This is weird. God at work. Last year, the Nevada Coalition for Suicide Prevention asked me to be their guest speaker. Right? So we started as a little engine that could, and we had that little group on the walk. And last year, the Nevada Council on Problem Gambling and the Suicide Prevention Coalition joined together and said, we are making gambling the focus of the entire walk this year. Isn't that cool? It's so amazing. You can't orchestrate that. And they came up with a pamphlet. If you don't have any information on suicide and gambling that's easy and accessible, do we have that here? Because you have such a pamphlet. I don't want to promote the Nevada Council if you've already got it. But feel free. It's available, a brochure specific to that. Breaking the stigma. This is my favorite bracelet now. No more shame. Great hashtag, no more shame. Use it in your Twitter. That they are breaking the stigma of addiction, this group, with just that hashtag. No more shame. And this is a CCAR statement that I love. Transformed lives transform lives. And did anybody go? Did it rock your world? The day the silence ends. Yes, October 4th, 2015, the Walk on the Mall of America. When finally, all of these voices in recovery, no longer faceless. This is the wave that's coming. And gambling addiction needs to get out in front of this. We need to destigmatize, right? Why is it okay to say, oh, you can get treatment for alcohol, not for gambling? Right? Elizabeth Vargas went on national TV and said she had a problem with alcohol and went to treatment, came back on TV, and everybody said, that is awesome. I challenge you to tell me one person that's done that with a gambling addiction, and the world said, that's awesome. It's Pete Rose, and he's not allowed in the Hall of Fame. What is the deal? Right? Makes no sense. So gambling is catching up, but we've got a ways to go. And this is what William White says. A day is coming when recovery from addiction will be viewed not as a curse to be masked and hidden, but as a cause for celebration and a gift to be shared with the world. A day is coming when for one moment in the history of this country, recovering people will stand together and offer themselves as living proof of the fulfilled promise of recovery. And you know how many new people we have here today, like the first time? Every one of you has a chance to be an advocate for compulsive gambling and recovery. Every one of you has a chance to add it to your intake question. Ask your personal physician, do you ask gambling questions on your intake? There are so many ways to just go, oh, awareness. Oh, why would I do that? You know, people that you see in the grocery store, people that you see anywhere, you never know where the opportunity is going to come to touch a life and make a difference. And I'll tell you this, on the way here yesterday, this is how you never know where you're supposed to be. I check in at the hotel, and the woman said, oh, you're with the University of Maryland. I said, no, I'm here for a conference. Oh, I said, I'm speaking about, she said, what about? Oh, problem gambling and recovery. And she went, oh. She goes, I understand all too well. We really need you here. She said, I just moved from Atlantic City. My parents got a divorce because of gambling. And she was like ready to fill up. And I said, is the gambler in recovery? And she said, no. I gave her my card, and I said, 1-800-GAMBLER. And instead of, she gave me my key, and we hugged. It was so awesome. So you never know where your moment will be, where the chance will be. But that's advocacy. It can be as little as impacting one person. It can be sharing the story. I don't mind if you share my story, but every one of you touches people with stories, right? And if they're not willing to share it out in public, say, well, write something on Lainey's Hope. Would you put it on a blog? Would you give me permission to use this quote? Start to have their voices heard. We certainly cannot have it where we're so anonymous, we're invisible, and we can't even hear our voices. Till my dying breath, what did you say, Deborah? I'll be in the great beyond. I'm still going to be talking about it. So I'm praying that, and I believe it. I believe the world can be different. I believe we talk about recovery. Don't identify by the addiction or the illness. Identify by the humanity. And that will give others the courage to take it out of the shadows, into the light, to humanize and illuminate the very human disease, addiction, gambling disorder. It impacts all of us. It's a public health issue, and it's an issue of the heart and humanity. And one other thing that came up earlier was for people that don't have Gamblers Anonymous meetings in their area, there is a phone meeting Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern, and anybody can dial in. And also, if you're counseling, you've never been to a meeting, ask if you can go. Many meetings are open. If your reasons are pure, and I know they are, go and experience it like Natasha told us earlier. So I thank you. I hope you join me in doing some advocacy for change. Thank you so much.